Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Chapter 8. The Potion Master. There, look! Where? Next to the tall boy with the red hair, wearing the glasses. Did you see his face? Did you see his scar? Whispers followed Harry from the moment he left his dormitory next day. People queuing outside classrooms stood on tiptoes to get a look at him, or doubled back to past him in the corridors again, staring. Harry wished they wouldn't because he was trying to concentrate on finding his way in classes. There were 142 staircases at Hogwarts, wide, sweeping ones, narrow, rickety ones, some that lead somewhere different on a Friday, some with a vanishing stop halfway up that you have to remember to jump. Then there were doors that wouldn't open unless you asked politely or tickled them in exactly the right place. The doors that wouldn't really door at all, but solid walls just pretending. It was also very hard to remember where anything was because it all seems to move around a lot. The people in the portrait kept going to visit each other, and Harry was sure the coat of armor could walk. The ghost didn't help either. It was always a nasty shock when one of the glide suddenly through a door when you were trying to open. Nearly Headless Nick was always happy to point new Gryffindors in the right direction, but Peeves, the poltergeist, wore to locked door and tricked the staircase if you met him when you were late for school. He could drop a waste paper basket on your head, pull the logs from under your feet, pelt you with bits of chunks, and sneak up behind you. Invisible grab your nose and shriek, "Gotcha, conk!" Even worse than Peeves, if it was possible, was the caretaker, Argus Filch. Harry and Ron managed to get on the wrong side of him on the very first morning. Filch found them trying to force their way through a door which unlikely turned to be the entrance to the out-of-bound corridors on the third floor. He wouldn't believe they were lost, was sure they were trying to break into it on purpose, and was threatening to lock them in the dungeon when they were rescued by Professor Quirrell, who was passing. Filch owned a cat called Mrs. Morris, a squally dust-colored creature with bulging lamp eyes just like Filch's. She patrolled the corridors alone, break a law in front of her, put just one toe out of line, and she'd whisk off for Filch, who'd appear within 2 seconds later. Filch knew the secret passageway of the school better than anyone, except perhaps the Weasley twins, and could pop up on as suddenly as any of the ghosts. The students all hate him, and it was the dreadest ambition of many to give Mrs. Norris a good kick. And then, once you have to manage to find them, there were the lessons themselves. There was a lot more to magic, as Harry quickly found out, than waving your wands and saying a few funny words. They had to study the night skies through their telescope every Wednesday at midnight and learn the names of different stars and movement of the planets. 3 times a week they went out on the greenhouse behind the castle to study hoverage with a dumpy little witch called Professor Sprout. When they learned how to take care of the strange plants and fungi and found out what they're used for. Easily the most boring lesson was History of Magic, which was the only class taught by a ghost. Professor Beans has been the old indeed when he had fallen asleep in the front of the staff room fire and got up next morning to teach, leaving his body behind him. Beans droned on and on while they were scribbling down names and dates and got Amalek and Evil and Unique and Old Balls mixed up. Professor Fitwick, the charm teacher, was a little witch who had to stand on a pile of books to see over his desk, At the start of the first lesson, he took on the register, and when he reached Harry's name, he gave an exciting squeal and toppled out of sight. Professor McGonagall was again different. Harry had been quite right to think she wasn't teacher to cross. Strict and clever, she gave them a talk to the moment they had to sit down in her first class. Transregulation is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts, she said. Anyone messing in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. Then she changed her desk into a pig and back again. They were all very impressive and couldn't wait to get started, but soon realized they weren't going to be changing the furniture into animals for a long time. After making a long of complete notes, they were each given a match and started turning it into a needle. By the end of the lesson, only Hermione Granger had made any difference to her match. Professor McGonagall showed the class how it had gone, all silver and pointy, and gave Hermione a rare smile. The class everyone was really been looking forward to the defense against the dark art, but Quirrell's lesson turned out to be a bit of a joke. His classroom smelled strongly of garlic, which everyone said was to a word of the vampire he'd met at Lumania and was afraid he'd be come back to get him one of these days. His turban, he told them, had given him by an African prince as a thank you for getting rid of the troublesome zombie. But they weren't sure they'd believe this story. For one thing, when Cinemas Finnegan asked eagerly how to hear how Quirrell had thought of the zombie, Quirrell went pink and started talking about the weather. For another, they had noticed a funny smell hung around the turban, and the Weasley twins insisted that it was stuffed full of garlic as well, so that Quirrell was protected wherever he went. Harry was very relieved to find out he wasn't miles behind everyone else. Lots of people had come from Muggle families and like him haven't had any idea that they were witches and wizards. There was no such thing to learn that even people like Lon didn't have much of a head start. Friday was an important day for Harry and Lon. They finally managed to find their way down to the Great Hall for breakfast without getting lost once. "What have we got today?" Harry asked Lon as he poured sugar on his porridge. "Double potion with the Slytherin," said Lon. "Snape's head of the Slytherin house. They says he always favors them." "We will be able to see, be sure." Which McGonagall favored us," said Harry. Professor McGonagall was head of Gryffindor house, but it hadn't stopped her giving them a huge pile of homework the day before. Just then the post arrived. Harry had got used this by now, but it had given him a little bit of shock on the first day, when about 100 owls had suddenly steamed into the great hall during breakfast, circling the tables until they saw their owners and dropping letters and packages on their laps. Hedwig's hadn't brought Harry anything so far. She sometimes flew into nibble his ears and some a bit of toast before going off to sleep in the owlie with the other school owls. The morning, however, she fluttered down between marmalades and sugar bowls and dropped a note onto Harry's plate. He tore it open at once. "Dear Harry," it said in a very untidy scrawl. "I know you get Friday afternoons off, so would you like to come and have a cup of tea with me around 3? I want to hear all about your first day. Send us an answer back with Hagrid." Harry brought Lon's scribbled "Yes please, see you later" on the back of the note and sent Hedwig off again. It was lucky that Harry had tea with Hagrid to look forward to, because the potion lesson turned out to be the worst thing that had happened to him so far. At the start of term banquet, Harry had got an idea that Professor Snape disliked him. By the end of the first potion lesson, he knew he'd been wrong. Snape didn't dislike Harry, he hated him. Potion lesson took place down in one of the dungeons. It was colder here than up in the main castle, and would have been quite creepy enough without the pickle animal floating in the glass jar all around the walls. Snape, like Flitwick, started the class by taking the register, and like Flitwick, he paused at Harry's name. "Ah, yes," he said softly, "Harry Potter, our new celebrity." Draco Malfoy and his friends Crabbe and Goyle sniggered behind their hands. Snape finished calling the names and looked up at the class. His eyes were black like Hagrid's, but they had none of Hagrid's warmth. They were cold and empty and made you think of dark tunnels. "You are here to learn subtle science and expect arts of potion making," he began. He spoke in barely more than a whisper, but they caught every word, like Professor McGonagall. Snape had the gift of keeping the class silent without effort. "As there is little foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you will really understand the beauty of the soft simmering cauldron with its simmering fumes, and the delicate power of liquid that creeps through human veins, bewitching their minds, ensnaring the senses. I can teach you how to bottle flame, brew glory, even stop death, if you aren't as big a bunch of dumbheads I usually have to teach." More silence followed the little speech. Harry and Ron exchanged looks with raised eyebrows. Hermione Granger was in the edge of her seat and looked desperate to start proving that she wasn't a doublehead. "Potter," said Snape suddenly, "what would I get if I added powdered roots and asphodel onto an infusion of wormwood?" "Powdered roots of what to an infuse of what?" Harry glanced at Ron, who looked as stumped as he was. Hermione's hand had shot into the air. "I don't know, sir," said Harry. Snape's lips curled into a sneer. "Toot toot, brains clearly isn't anything." He ignored Hermione's hand. "Try again, Potter. Where would you look if I told you to find a bazaar?" Hermione stretched her hands as high as into the air as she could go without her leaving her seat. But Harry didn't have the faintest idea of what a bazaar is. He tried not to look at Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, who were shaking with laughter. "I don't know, sir. Thought you won't open a book before coming, eh, Potter?" Harry forced himself to keep looking straight into those cold eyes. He had looked through his books at Dudley's, but did Snape expect him to read everything in 1,000 magical horrors of Fudgy? Snape was still ignoring Hermione's quivering hand. "What is the difference, Potter, between monkshood and wolfbands?" At this, Hermione stood up, her hands stretching towards the dungeon ceiling. "I don't know," said Harry quickly. "I think Hermione does, though. Why don't you try her?" A few people laughed. Harry caught Seamus' eyes and Seamus winked. Snape, however, was not pleased. "Sit down," he snapped at Hermione. "For your information, Potter, asphodel is wormwood make a sleeping potion so powerful is it known the dread of living death. Bazaar is a stone taken from the stomach of a goat, and it will save you from most potions. As for monkshood and wolfsbane, they are the same plant, which also goes for the name of aconite. Well, why aren't you copying that down?" There was a sudden rummaging for queers and parchment over the noise, Snape said, "and a point will be taken from Gryffindor House for your check, Potter." Things didn't improve. The Gryffindors and potions lesson continued. Snape put them into pairs and set them to mix up the simple potion to cure boils. He swapped around in his long black locks, watching them weed dried nettles and crush snake fangs, chrising almost everyone except Malfoy, who seems to like he was just telling everyone to look at the perfect way Malfoy was chewing his horned slugs, and cloud of acid green smoke and a loud hissing filling the dread dungeon. Neville had somehow managed to melt Simmy's cauldron into a twisted blob, and their potion was sweeping against the stone floor, burning holes in people's shoes. Within seconds, the whole class was standing on the stairs too, while Neville, who had been drenched in the potion when the cauldron collapsed, moaned in pain as angry red boils splashed all over his arms and legs. "Idiot boy!" snarled Snape, cleaning the spilled potions away with one wave of his wand. "I suppose you added the pockpin square before taking the cauldron off the fire?" Neville whimpered as boils started to pop off over his nose. "Take him up to the hospital in," Snape spat at Seamus. Then he rounded on Harry and Ron, who had been working next to Neville. "You, Potter, why didn't you tell him not to add the queers? Thought he would make you look good if he got it wrong, did you? That's another point you've lost for Gryffindor." This is so unfair that Harry opened his mouth to argue, but Ron ticked him behind his cauldron. "Don't push it," he muttered. "I heard Snape can turn very nasty." As they climbed the step out of the dungeon an hour later, Harry's mind was racing and his spirits were low. He'd lost 2 points for Gryffindor in his very first week. Why did Snape hated him so much? "Cheer up," said Ron. "Snape's always taking points off Fred and George. Can I come to meet Hagrid with you?" At 5 to 3, they left the castle and made their way across the ground. Hagrid lived in a little wooden house on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. A crossbow and a pair of groceries was out of the front door. When Harry knocked, they heard a fastic scurrying from inside several booming barks. Then Hagrid's voice rang out, saying, "Back, Fang, back!" Hagrid's big, heavy face appeared in the cracks and he pulled the door open. "Hang on," he said. "Back, Fang." He let them in, struggled to keep a hold on the collar of the enormous black bear-hoard. There was only one room inside. Ham and pheasants were hanging from the ceiling. A couple kettles were boiling on the open fire in the corner. Stood a massive bed with a punchwork built in it. "Make yourself at home," said Hagrid, letting go of Fang, who bounded straight at Ron and started licking his ears. Like Hagrid, Fang was clearly not as fierce as he looked. "This is Ron," Harry told Hagrid, was pouring boiled water into a large teapot and putting rock cake onto a plate. "Another Weasley, eh?" said Hagrid, glancing at Ron Freckles. "I spent half me life chasing your twin brother away from the forest." The rock cakes almost break their teeth, but Harry and Ron pretended to enjoy them as they told Hagrid all about their first lessons. Fang rested his head on Harry's knees and drooled all over his lobes. Harry and Ron were delighted to hear Hagrid call Filch an old git. "On as full as a cat, Mrs. Norris. I hate her introduced her to Fang sometimes. Do you know, every time I get off to the school, she follows me everywhere. Can't get rid of her. Filch puts her up to me." Harry and Hagrid about Snape's lesson. Hagrid liked Ron, told Harry not to worry about it. They Snape liked hardly any of the students. "But he seemed to really hate me." "Rubbish," said Hagrid. "Why should he?" Yet Harry couldn't help thinking that Hagrid didn't quite meet his eyes when he said that. "How's your brother Charlie?" Harry and Hagrid asked Ron. "I liked him a lot. Great with animals." Harry wondered if Hagrid had changed the subject on purpose. While Ron told Hagrid all about Charlie's work on dragons, Harry picked up a piece of paper that was lying on the table under the tea cozy. It was cutting from the Daily Prophet. Gringotts breaking latest. Investigation continued into the break-in at Gringotts in 31 July. Widely believed to be the work of the Dark Wizards or witches unknown. Gringotts goblins today insisted that nothing had been taken. The boats that was searched had in fact been emptied the same day. But we are not telling you what was in there, so keep your nose out of if you know what that's good for you, said the Gringotts goblin this afternoon. Harry remembered Ron telling him on the train that someone had tried to rob Gringotts, but Ron hadn't mentioned the date. Hagrid, said Harry, the Gringotts break-ins happened on my birthday. It might have been something while we were there. There were no doubt about it. Hagrid definitely didn't meet Harry's eyes this time. He grunted and offered him another rock cake. Harry read the story again. The boats that were searched had in fact been empty earlier that same day. Hagrid had emptied the boat 713. Have you coded the emptying, taking out the grubby little package? Had that been what the thieves were looking for? As Harry and Ron walked back to the castle for dinner, the pockets weighed down the rock cakes they had been too polite to refuse. Harry thought none of the lessons he had so far had given him so much to think about as the tea up with Hagrid. Had Hagrid collected the package just in time? Was it now? And did Hagrid know something about Snape that he didn't want to tell Harry?